Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zekthar,
And I'm Yuxin.
and we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and this month we'll be discussing the backbone of the Imperium of Man, the Astra Militarum.
Indeed, and this week we'll be discussing the origins on how they came to be, their role now in the Imperium, and how things work in the military of humanity.
Indeed, Yuxin. But first, a word of thanks.
Really? To whom?
Well, as you know, Zekthar, we've been asking for funding from our dear listeners for quite some time to help with the transwarp fees.
Don't you mean taxes?
Yes. With the taxes of relaying our voxes from the 40th dimension to the Terran 42.
Yes, and the call has been answered by our two members, Sir Bender Biden and Hermes Skirty.
Indeed. And yes, they have. We set up our membership program last year about this time on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashraka.
Quite right, brother. And while it has only given us two fruits, we are deeply thankful to them. But what's your point?
Well, our long member Hermes Skirty has given up his membership for being just a lad.
Oh, well, that's too bad. He had a lot of really good questions for our Q&A.
Yes, he does. And he didn't let me finish. He actually likes our program so much that he joined back on as a space marine.
What?
Indeed. So, Hermes, I know you're listening. You have our deepest thanks. And honestly, I don't know what to say.
I can. Hermes, you're a gentleman and a scholar. In fact, I dare say I tip my cap to you, good sir. You're not thinking enough for such a gift. On your birthday.
Oh, perhaps you should sing happy birthday?
Nope. I'm not going to sing.
Okay, well, fair enough. But as for you, Hermes, may the heavens sing your praise, and may Mkulu guide your life in wisdom and righteousness.
Now, Zekthar, we're not supposed to mention his name.
I think it's applicable with the mighty Hermes, don't you?
Well, fair enough.
Indeed. Well, with much thanks in our hearts, let us get into the Vox on the Imperial Guard. Yet to understand the origins of the Imperial Guard, we have to go back, way back, to the time before the Emperor. Now, during the turbulent era known as the Age of Strife, the Sol system and the nearby star systems that had been colonized by humanity during the Age of Technology were effectively cut off from the interstellar travel or communication with each other due to the massive warp storms that swept the galaxy. Little remained of the once sophisticated civilization of old Earth's glorious past, as the center of the growing human interstellar society marked by advanced science, high culture, and wondrous technologies.
This never made sense to me.
Why not?
Well, normally huge jumps in technology are advanced by warfare. What made this time in history any different?
Okay. Yeah, I see your point. Unfortunately, the techno-barbarian warlords and their warrior hordes made use of chemical, biological, and even thermonuclear weapons of mass destruction, and slowly transformed the cradle of mankind into a battered, post-apocalyptic wasteland across most of its scarred surface.
Oh, I see. That makes more sense. Hard to advance when all your resources are blown up.
Yeah. Right. But as you know, against this backdrop of oppression, violence, and casual brutality, the Emperor of Mankind first revealed himself to the people of Terra. In secret, he had been planning for this moment in history for millennia. Ever since the Age of Strife had fractured what remained of the ancient human civilizations, which had once stretched across a part of the galaxy.
So what you're saying is he waited until there was almost nothing left and then took over? Why did he try to help when there was a chance for advancement and peace? As John Miller Stewart said, bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing.
Well, excellent quote, first off. And secondly, as much as we've discussed the Emperor of Man, I don't think we've ever accused him of being a good man.
True, but...
And secondly, it's much easier to rule and conquer a place when they have exhausted most of their resources, and the common people just have no hope.
Good point.
Yeah, well, getting back to it, the Emperor moved to create the military organizations he would need to begin the reunification of mankind. and he used the raw materials at hand after a millennia of savage conflict between the techno-barbarian nation-states of Old Earth. Formed during the savage continental wars that had engulfed Terra in the Age of Strife, the genetically enhanced warriors known as Genos comprised the first units of the force that would become the Imperial Army and would serve as the prototypes for the later development of the Proto-Space Marines, called the Thunder Warriors. Among the most well-known of the regiments composed of Genos were the so-called Strife Epoch regiments, raised by the Emperor to initiate the Unification Wars, intended to reunite all of the warring peoples of Terra beneath his benevolent rule. The genetically enhanced Strife Epoch regiments came to form the nucleus of the armed forces that would later support the even more genetically advanced Space Marine legions during their reconquest of the human-settled galaxy. The Emperor began his conquest of Terra with the intent to reunite the warring techno-barbarian nations into a unified planetary government, and then used Terra as a springboard from which to begin his reconquest of the galaxy under the aegis of an Imperium of Man, dedicated to the imperial truth of progress and reason. The Genos proved throughout the conflict to reunite Terra that became known as the Unification Wars to be a most effective and adaptable military unit. During this time, the Genos practiced gene mustering, an essential tool during these caustic years of atomic hurricanes and drifting rad clouds. Right on, dude. Though the use of genetic manipulation, the Genos were able to develop tough and physical imposing warriors, but they complemented their brute strength and resilience by importing smart, proven field commanders from other forces that kept their genetic pool pure. The genetically enhanced regiments of this period, such as the lauded Geno 52 Chiliad, would go on to become amongst some of the oldest brigades to serve in the later Imperial Army. Each Geno of the Imperial Army, in addition to referring to the individual genetic enhanced soldiers, also was a term applied to an elite force of the Imperial Army that was composed of 1,000 companies, with each maintaining a proud martial tradition. These surviving Genos were proud members of the Old Hundred, the Strife Epoch regiments that the Emperor, in his grace, had maintained in existence after the completion of the Unification, provided that they had pledged their loyalty to him. Many thousands of other Geno units had been forced to disband after the achievement of unity, or had been actively purged and chemically neutered, depending on their level of resistance to the new order brought by the unification of Terra under the Emperor's new planetary government. When the great warp storms that had cut off Terra since the end of the Dark Age of technology subsided, the Age of Strife came to an end in the late 30th millennium. The Emperor of Mankind deemed it time to begin his Great Crusade. This was a massive campaign, began in 800.M30 to conquer the galaxy, by which he and his armies would free all human-settled colony worlds from alien oppression or primitive ignorance and reunite the human species across the galaxy under the single banner of the new Imperium of Man.
Wow, that's a really nice way of saying he went off to conquer the galaxy.
Yep. The Great Crusade marked a brief era in human history of rebuilding, reunification, and rapid technological advancement, following the complete regression of mankind into techno-barbarism during the 5,000 Terran years of the Age of Strife. At the forefront of this time of expansion and reclamation were the mighty Space Marine legions, the Legiones Astartes, the finest warriors humanity had ever created, each the equal of a dozen normal men. Now, despite their formidable battle prowess, the forces of the Space Marines were not limitless, and the relentless demands of building a galactic empire pushed the legions farther apart. Separated by countless thousands of light years, their presence became even more scattered and diluted. No doubt from the very beginning, the Emperor realized that while his Legiones Astartes would be his foremost agents of war and conquest, the sheer scope of the undertaking of the Great Crusade, no less the liberation
Conquering
of the entire galaxy, would require far more manpower, spread over a wider area than even hundreds of thousands of Space Marines could hope to achieve. They simply could not be everywhere at once, nor would they be best served by undertaking roles ably filled by ordinary humanity. From this reality, the Exertus Imperialis was born. Billions of second-line support troops, functionaries, laborers, void crew, logisticians, almoners, adepts, and staff officers, and the countless quantities of weapons, equipment, and war machines, void conveyances, and warships they needed, all to make the Great Crusade a reality. Within this vast body of men and women under arms, organized and formulated by the Emperor's own transhuman intelligence, were many highly specialized divisions, each created to serve a singular purpose, each a vital cog in the vast imperial war machine. The Emperor required more manpower to ensure the momentum of the Great Crusade did not falter. Each newly conquered or liberated world brought into imperial compliance during the course of the imperial campaign was assessed and a census taken of its population. From this, the Emperor's administratum and the Corps Logisticae, the forerunner of the later Departamento Militarum,
which I will talk about in a bit,
calculated the tithe that each world was to pay in the form of a regiments of soldiers and war material. The number of regiments raised from each world varied enormously in accordance with the size of each individual planet's population. Sparsely populated worlds would be tithed to supply only a handful of regiments annually, whilst the overcrowded hive worlds near the galactic core would have to supply hundreds of regiments each standard year. This huge body of soldiers soon became known as the Imperialis Auxilia, and more commonly referred to as the Imperial Army. Now, although the Imperial Army was not as powerful as the Space Marine legions under the Primarch's command, the Imperial Army regiments were nevertheless useful additions to a Primarch's fighting strength. A Space Marine legion often had hundreds of auxiliary Imperial Army regiments fighting under its command. These troops were used to reinforce the Space Marines and were frequently deployed in sieges, mass invasions, and the garrison newly conquered worlds. The Imperial Army was rarely deployed within a home system of the regiments that comprised it. In fact, this was actively avoided by the Primarchs in command of these regiments to ensure that the soldiers' loyalties lay first and foremost with the individual Primarch and the Space Marine Legion to which they had been attached, and alongside which they fought. The Exertus Imperialis of the Great Crusade era was a vast organization whose numbers in a literal sense was uncounted. No accurate measure of it was ever possible, so numerous was it. Widespread across the stars and in flux as units were disbanded or suffered attrition. And fresh units, recruits and indentures, were added to its ranks. As a structure, it was almost unfathomably complex. It formed the incomprehensible vast support structure of the Great Crusade, including in its sweep the Expeditionary Fleet's front line auxiliary and the second line reserve forces, known collectively under the subtitle of the Imperialis Auxilia, or Imperial Army informally, and the billions of planetary militia raised provincial defenses. It also included a myriad support organization, colossal labor hosts, penitentiary legions, the warships and crew of the Imperialis Armada, and vast executory, notary, and tithe corps. And nominally, the remembrancers and the itinerators of the enforcers of the imperial truth. All were bound by its writ. Although notionally it was to the officio militaris on terra and via them the imperial court to whom the numberless ranks of the Exertus Imperialis answered, it was also in truth subordinate to the principal agents and independent powers of the Great Crusade, who commanded it on a daily basis. The Legiones Astartes and their Primarchs, the Mechanicum and their Titan legions, the Knight houses, the rogue traders militant, the imperial commanders who governed the Imperium's worlds, the Navis Nobility, and the Collegia Psychana, all had better and more immediate call on the Exertus Imperialis to obey.
This organizational structure hurt the Imperium when Horus made his move, I assume.
You would assume correct, dear brother. After the War Master Horus and the onset of the Horus heresy in the early 31st millennium, it soon became apparent that the monumental mistake it had been to place Imperial Army units under the control of the Space Marine legions. Now, during the Civil War, the Imperium was split asunder, and humanity turned in upon itself in a bloody war which almost saw its complete destruction. Alongside the traitor Astartes legions marched millions of Imperial soldiers, men and women drawn from across the colonies of mankind and gathered under the banner of the Emperor. When Horus turned against his father, he took countless soldiers and ships of the Imperial Army with him. These men, which had once fought for humanity during the Emperor's Great Crusade, to reunite the human-settled galaxy under the Imperial banner, were instead pitted against each other in a bloody struggle as the heresy unfolded and civil war spanned the galaxy. Amongst the traitor legions, almost all of their attached Imperial army formations uniformly followed their masters into rebellion, out of fear or blind faith. Now, over the course of the heresy, entire armies of mortals were raised and squandered both by the traitors and the desperate loyalist commanders. Across the breadth and width of the galaxy, the Imperial army tore itself apart in monumental battles on a scale unseen in human history. Combined forces of fleet and army elements moved from world to world at the command of generals and loyal commanders whose loyalties were unknown to both sides. Thousands of pocket empires were carved out by ambitious commanders with no true loyalty to either side. Over the course of the following centuries, and at the cost of billions of lives, the Imperium was slowly reforged, forever tainted by the blood spilt and the massive civil war which had almost destroyed it. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. After Horus was defeated and his armies had taken flight from Terra into the Eye of Terror, the Imperium was in chaos, weakened and shattered after long years of war. Even though the need for the Imperial army was as great as ever, those loyalist leaders that remained, led by the Ultramarine Legion's Primarch Rabute Gilliman, were fearful of a repeat of the rebellion which had cost them so dearly. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, massive changes were implemented to civil and military administration of the Imperium on Gilliman's orders, a period forever after known as the Imperial Reformation. To prevent the possibility of large-scale rebellion occurring again, the titanic armies of the Imperial forces were divided. The Space Marine legions were dissolved and split into separate 1,000 Astartes-strong chapters. No longer would the superhuman Space Marines serve as the Imperium's frontline military force. That task would fall to the mortals who had once comprised the Imperial army. There were far more of them than there were of the surviving loyalist Space Marines. And more importantly, should they turn renegade, the damage they would do would be far less. The newborn Adeptus Astartes would assume the role of planetary assault forces and elite special operations troops. Thus, the Imperial army, as it had been for centuries, ceased to exist. The link between the Imperial fleet, the Armada Imperialis, and the Imperial army was formally and bureaucratically severed. Never again would an Imperial ground commander be given direct control over interstellar ships, or even their own units' air support. From the ashes of the Imperial army was born the separate armed services of the Imperial Navy and the Astra Militarum. The Imperial Guard was reorganized into smaller units known as regiments, an existing formation from the old organization structure of the Imperial Army, and centrally trained political officers known as commissars were universally introduced to watch out for disloyalty and to keep the guardsmen and naval crews properly motivated in defense of the Imperium. The interdependence of the newly formed Astra Militarum, the most numerous of the Emperor's troops, ensured that should a regiment turn against their oath of fealty, they would not be able to spread their treachery beyond a single world. And should an Imperial naval fleet mutiny, they would not have the ability to resupply or deploy ground troops. The Imperium had learned a harsh and painful lesson following the dark days of the Horus Heresy. This was the birth of the Imperial Guard as it exists in the late 42nd millennium. Divided by logistics and separated by gulfs of space and a myriad of different planetary cultures, it remains united by a common duty to the God Emperor of mankind. Riddled with inefficiencies and bureaucracy, it is often slow to respond and resistant to change, but it continues to function despite the rules laid down by the Adeptus Administratum to limit its power and use by untrustworthy commanders. Now, you're going to get into the actual structure of the Astra Militarum, brother, but I was wondering what your thoughts were on the origins of the Imperial Guard and, more importantly, the Imperial Army.
Well, one of the things I find interesting about the Genos is how they decide that either they'd be eliminated or neutered.
Right. Well, I think that was because they wanted them to reproduce.
I know,
So
but it's
apparently
like,
the Genos were not like the Space Marines. The Space Marines cannot reproduce. That part of them, we've talked about this before. That doesn't function anymore. But apparently they didn't think about that with the Genos. And as you know, Genos tend to get it on quite a bit. So they were like, crap, we got to take care of this quick.
They're pretty like their bits.
We can't give Gino a 3-day pass. It'll be all over. Anyways, yeah, I wonder what happened to the Genos. They just get kind of, I guess, melded into the Imperial Army, and then they just slowly got phased out.
I don't know.
Because it seems like the 100, anyways, it didn't, from what I gathered, anyways, it didn't seem like the 100 got neutered or exterminated.
No.
So I wonder what happened to them.
Maybe they slowly just died off since they weren't being, you know.
I do think, anyways, that it's fairly interesting how drastically they shifted it after the Horus Heresy. I mean, don't get me wrong, with good cause. But that concept, anyways, that they split up the Army and the Navy, which I think was actually a really good idea. And on top of that, anyways, giving it the concept so that if, like, for instance, if someone turns traitor, they're kind of stuck wherever they are until, you know,
Yeah.
they get things together so that they can actually start building ships, depending on how far away they are. But they can't,
Right.
like, you know, take Imperial ships. But
And of course, who was the forerunner to this? Gilliman.
oh yeah, Gilliman during the time after the siege of Terra, Gilliman, he was pretty busy before they ended up doing the Great Scouring. I mean, he had a lot of stuff that he reformed. I mean, a lot. Unfortunately, a lot of that, anyways, is one of the problems that he didn't. A lot of the stuff, anyways, you look at it and you're like, wow, that was kind of brilliant. I mean, like what he did with the Astra Militarum, I think that was actually a really good idea and really well constructed. Splitting them up and figuring that all out, anyways. But then you got the whole senatorium and the bureaucracy behind that, anyways. I think he just never really thought of the concept that humanity would actually shoot itself in the foot to make a buck. I just don't think he really thought about it that way. So when he left, of course, that's what happened. Now that he's back, anyways, I mean, that is his biggest bear, is actually his own creation, which I find kind of interesting. But I don't know. Well, what are your 2 cents before we move on?
Well, I do think that one of the things he didn't take into account is how, if you factor it too much, like, for example, corruption can seep in pretty much anywhere.
Right.
And
go ahead.
I guess he didn't take into account the fact that, you know, the High Lords of Terra still exist. And he should have known already that they weren't, you know, pure of heart.
Well, yeah. It's the whole system he set up, anyways, was under the concept that there would be somebody strong in command. So, I mean, I've said this before. I think I've said this before, at least, anyways. But, like, for instance, you take a dictatorship. A dictatorship works wonderfully if you've got a guy at the top that's, you know, looking out for the people and he can immediately make decisions. I mean, that's like perfect. The problem is that those guys don't come along very often. And when they do, they don't last very long. And the person that normally comes in behind them isn't as benevolent as they are. And they're actually more kind of dicks normally. So they end up just like,
case, we have the High Lords of Terra where they all are.
Where they all are, yeah. And what he did, instead of replacing, anyways, a great, you know, noble leader, replaced it with a whole bunch of dicks instead of just having one. So, which made it worse. Quite frankly, any type of government that you have, anyways, where it just doesn't come down to one person's single decision is always going to be slow.
Right.
But
when all of them are corrupt.
I mean, quite frankly, he needed to actually set up like a 3 or 4 party system or something, anyways. And I mean, he should have set up something different. But like I said, I don't think he was thinking of that. I was thinking, anyways, that he was thinking everybody is, you know, on the side of humanity. I think he was a little what's the word I'm looking for? Naive. Back in the 31st millennium. Now, anyways, I mean, I think he came to the realization after hearing, anyways, about what happened in the last 10,000 years. And he went, oh no, you know, I've made a terrible mistake.
Or many of them.
I don't know how I'm going to fix it. This is such a disaster.
Well, I try to think of it. I'm going on a crusade.
Yeah. Well, I mean, quite frankly, I mean, don't get me wrong. The bureaucracy of the Imperium is a big thorn in his side and a big problem, but it's not the biggest problem. I mean, I think we could both agree the Great Rift is probably his biggest problem at the moment.
Right.
So that and Abaddon and all that stuff, anyways, the whole war aspect, I think, is kind of his biggest problem right now. But anyways, speaking of the guys at the top and how things work, how does the Astra Militarum work? How does its chain of command work?
Okay, well, let's start from the top and work our way down when it comes to this. At the highest
Truly.
is the Lord Commander Militant.
Nope, Yuxin. I think we should start with the peons down at the bottom and then work our way.
Okay, in that case, we start with white shields.
What the
And
hell's
then
a
from
white
that, we have the conscripts. And then from that, we have the regular trooper.
Yeah, well, what are their names and ranks? Well, starting with our 15th trillionth man, Trooper Bill. Okay, sorry. Go for it.
Okay, so at the highest level of the Imperial Guard is commanded by the Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Guard, who is a member of the High Lords of Terra. So, corrupt person number 1 is in charge. The wishes of the High Lords are passed down from the Lord Commander Militant to his subordinates, the Lord Commander Segmentum, who notionally control the actions of the Imperial Guard within their segmente. In practice, however, the immense difficulties involved in exercising command and control over such distances means that actual direction of guard forces is orchestrated by officers lower down the command tree. So the next one that we should bring up is the War Masters, which are created when a crusade is being planned.
Did
The
you say
resources from multiple
War
sectors are
Master?
needed. It is only available and granted by the High Lords of Terra.
Yes. Now, like you said, anyways, only the High Lords of Terra, in particularly the Lord Commander Militant, is only allowed, anyways, to hire on a War Master. And War Masters
Hire on.
Yes, he hires them on.
Hey,
like
Joe, you want to be a War Master? I'm the janitor. You're a War Master. Go.
Well, okay, now, so, I mean, obviously, anyways, generals, they try to jockey to become a War Master. Normally, a War Master is set up for, like, crusades.
Right.
To retake giant places. Now, once you are the War Master, the only person that you really actually answer to is the Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Guard. So it is a huge amount of power rested on one person. I mean, they are allowed. I mean, a War Master can pretty much tell a chapter master of an Astartes group what to do. That's how powerful they are. Now, mind you, a chapter master can look at him and go, eat rocks, but normally they don't.
Just stuff it.
They could, but they normally don't. The only people that seem to have a problem with this is the Inquisition, but the Inquisition have a problem with everybody.
Well, Inquisition are a law unto themselves. They don't have to do anything.
I know, which is so frustrating. It's got to be annoying to everybody that has to deal with them. But like I said, anyways, War Master. I mean, I have talked about a couple of them. Slado, Achilles. Who's the other guy in the Sabbath Crusades?
Macroth.
Makaroth. Thank you. Yeah. And Makaroth. But the whole concept is that they literally are in charge of all and they can grab forces from anywhere in a segmentum, as long as it is to help their crusade, right, which is also kind of imperative and important. But it is like you said, Yuxin, it's a very rare title. They don't really issue out a war masters don't come around very often. Let's put it that way. A lot of times, even in crusades, anyways, they will just send out a crusade and they don't put a war master in charge of it.
Right.
It's only like the really big ones that they do that.
And there aren't that many crusades to begin with either.
Yeah.
Because there's so much shuffling around, they're trying to keep everybody actually in line and actually be able to,
Unless you're a Black Templar. And then it's always crusade time.
Yes, but they aren't part of the Astra Militarum, are they?
I thought for sure you were going to say, but that's only one crusade because it's the same one that's been going on for the last 10,000 years. Well, okay, so other than War Master, so who is really actually underneath, anyways, the segmentum Lord Commander Segmentum.
So the highest conventional field rank in the Imperial
Right.
Guard is the Lord General Militant, and they're in charge of whole battle groups of Imperial Guard regiments and are assigned to their combat theater by the Departamento Munitorum. After that, it gets pretty confusing because after that you have the general staff of the Lord General Militant, and these people can rank from lieutenant to general. So, the general staff of the Imperial Guard is not coherent organization. The term is principally used to describe all officers who serve in the command echelons above those of regimental level. Most commanding officers of the staff category carry some form of general's rank, but more junior officers can also be found in the general staff. They're drawn from regiments to act as aides and administrative assistants. They do not exercise individual authority and merely act as conduits between their superiors and other officers. As a position common in the general staff is that of Imperial Tactician, a non-command rank that nevertheless is vital. Trained staff officers, tacticians help to devise and organize battle plans and strategy. The Lord General is the highest rank available inside the general staff and is one with a multitude of official designations. Now, after the general staff, we reach the regimental officers. According to the Tacticae Imperium, regimental leaders range in rank from colonel to lieutenant. In practice, however, the individual regiments making up the vast Imperial Guard are drawn from so many different human worlds, in turn, many different cultures, that between different regiments, the actual name given to an officer rank can vary heavily. For example, the Death Corps of Krieg, for a very long time, the highest rank was Colonel, I believe.
Okay, so how's that different?
No. Of their entire planet, the highest ranking officer was Colonel.
So everybody underneath him was either a captain or a lieutenant. There wasn't more than one colonel.
Nope.
Well, okay. So what you're saying is that colonel to colonel to the Krieg, anyways, is a different concept to it than anywhere else in the galaxy. Okay, I get you.
Yeah. And so eventually the Imperial government is like, no, we can't do that. Yes, you can call him a colonel, but we're going to call him a general. Anyways, regimental officers hail from the same world as the troops they command, assuming officer rank at the initial formation of the regiment. Prior to this, they may have held positions of leadership within the PDF, aka Planetary Defense Force, from which members of the regiment may have been drawn. In some cases, such as when a regiment is formed from a hive world gang, officers are the former leaders of the gang. The guardsman's loyalty is naturally to the colonel of his regiment and other regimental officers, who all have a common world of origin. Regimental officers are advised not to throw the lives of their men away with impunity. Those who needlessly sacrifice the men under their command are likely to end up in the penal legions or shot.
What about the Krieg? Don't throw the lives of your men away needlessly. Right. Fix bayonets. I mean, it's the Krieg. That's what they do.
Krieg.
Sorry. Go ahead.
And they're different. They don't. No, anyways. So for rankings, we had the Castellan, which is high-level officer, often formally ranked as captains or colonels. Yet, unlike regular command squads, Castellans don't go into battle accompanied by retinue. They move among their troops, issuing orders and directing fire wherever it's needed.
Real quick here. So, most of you, anyways, are probably thinking, Castellan, where do I know that name before? Well, it's probably because we've talked about it when we were talking about Creed, Ursakar E. Creed, who was the Lord High Castellan of Cadia. Now, that's a lot different than your regular Castellan. First off, he's a Lord Castellan. And secondly, that ranking for Cadia is almost like a War Master of Cadia. It's not a term that's used very often. It's only anyways when everything has hit the fan and they're like, crap, we need somebody running this thing. And normally, as you so eloquently put it, Yuxin, it's the governor going, good luck. He takes off.
Books off. It's like, it's your problem now. I'm taking my suitcase and going on vacation.
Probably to a different planet. I'll see you when we get back. If there's a planet to get back to. Oh, didn't work out for Cadia. Anyways, what's the next group of regimental officers?
Okay, the next one is the typical commanding officer of regiment, colonel. Then you had the second command of regiment, which is the major, which, of course, like every single other one of these ranks pretty much, doesn't necessarily tend to be the particularly universal title of the second command or of whatever rank it is. Following that is the captain, who is a combat unit, generally company strength commander. They are also the most common regimental senior officers. Then you have the tank commanders, which obviously lead squadrons of battle tanks. Then you have the most junior officers on the battlefield, the lieutenant.
Don't you mean lieutenant, sir?
No, I mean lieutenant.
Like, I'm not bloody British. Sorry. Who are the non-coms?
The non-coms are generally, these are the general titles, sergeants and corporals. There, of course, is probably other names depending on the culture, but these are the two most notable. Then from there, you have the standard trooper, and then you have conscripts and probators. Now, these are, well, in some regiments, conscripts are on the level as the standard guardsmen. In others, they must earn their right to be fully inducted into the regiment. This is particularly prominent with white shields.
What's a white shield, and how do they differ from conscripts? I mean, I've heard the term white shield before, but I've never really looked into them.
Okay, so conscripts are more like, for example, if they were to grab somebody immediately from the Planetary Defense Force who's had like next to no training, or if they went, hey, you've been following behind the Imperial Guard as one of the hanger-ons, you're of age, you're enlisting.
That's a conscript, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
White shields are more like people that have been already trained and been in the field of battle, just haven't been actually brought into the guard yet, specifically.
So how does that differ from a conscript?
Conscripts would be people that they have just brought in, and so they're like, they've maybe started their train or have just been trained, whereas comparison white shields are people that have been fighting prior to even being brought into the guard. For example, in Gaunt's Ghost, he ended up saving somebody by the name of Milo Bryn and took him on as an adjutant. So he had been fighting for a long time, and then he joined as a trooper.
Wasn't he originally like his musician?
Yeah, he was a piper.
Right. And then when he got old, right? Okay, I gotcha. So he, I mean, well, yes, he played the pipes. I mean, he was still in combat. So
I would also consider Dalen Creed one, but that was because even though he wasn't technically in battle before he got raised, he was raised to fight. He wasn't actually in war, but he was raised to fight by his adoptive
parents. Right.
Parents.
Catherine and Tony, I want to say.
Yeah.
And by the way, is it Creed or Crid? I always thought it was Crid.
I always thought Creed.
All right, well, maybe, okay. Here's a question to our dear listeners. Is it Creed or Crid? It's spelled C-R-I-I-D.
Or is it Cried?
Or is it Cried? No, I hope it's not Cried. That would be terrible.
Toto Cried.
Oh, no. What's she sad about this time again? No, that's her name. Oh, okay. Anyway, sorry. Okay, well, that's actually fairly interesting. So So conscripts, anyways, like you said, conscripts they're ones that are going to be like they're like fresh recruits. They're going through boot camp, but because they're still in the Imperial Guard and the Imperial Guard is moving, they're like boot camping in combat, right?
It's the real life experience.
Real life experience of boot camp.
You're
And then
training on the job.
on the job training. And then the White Shields, though, on the other hand, the White Shields, they've been brought up with the Imperial Guard and they pretty much already know how to fight, but they're like, okay, you still have to kind of, thanks to bureaucratic paperwork, you still
have to
run
graduate. You already have all the necessary skills. You still need to graduate.
You need to graduate, yes. Well, it's really interesting, but is that really actually all the ranks of the Imperial Guard? I mean, where are the commissars at? I figured they would have been in there, I mean, somewhere.
Well, commissars are special Imperial officers assigned to the Imperial Guard regiments and Imperial Navy ships, whose purpose is to enforce discipline and devotion to the Emperor of mankind. Independent of the conventional Imperial Guard hierarchy, commissars are instead attached to the Departamento Munitorum's Commissariat and are formally part of the Militarum Tempestus.
Ah, yes. The Departamento Militarum. You mentioned you were going to discuss or talk about that later on. Is now that time?
Yes.
Aha!
The Department Munitorum, or the Munitorum, is a department of the Administratum devoted to the general administration, supply, and command of the Imperial Guard. However, despite its necessity, it is often viewed by the Guard as ineffective. Munitorum has ultimate responsibility for the raising of new regiments, training of troops, provisions of equipment and supplies, and transportation of troops and equipment to and from theaters of war. It is primarily a logistical organization like the Administratum, but while the Administratum deals with civilian logistics, the Munitorum deals with the logistics of war. Using military as opposed to civilian ranks, the Departamento Munitorum dates back to the Great Crusade. You see, the earliest incarnation of the Munitorum was known as the Corps Logisticae for a while, then a division within the naval administration of the Armada Imperialis, then was briefly overseen by the superb logistical brilliance of the Regent of Terra Malcador the Sigillate and his appointed subordinates.
Oh, really? Merlin?
Only shortly prior to Primarch Horus's appointment as Imperial War Master following the victory in the Ulanor Crusade, had the Corps Logisticae grown into a full departmento of the Imperial administration, with all the bureaucratic advantages and disadvantages that it brought them. But initially, some mistakes had been made, such as confusion over planetary coordinates and non-standard equipment reaching the Space Marine legions.
The mistake probably wasn't done by Merlin.
The earliest pioneers in organizing a unified Imperial supply and recruitment structure had almost insurmountable obstacles to overcome, not least of which was the reluctance of each Imperial Expedition's corps of officers, most of them Space Marines, to relinquish control of such things to mere mortals, even when they were more qualified to administer them than Astartes. As the Imperium continued to expand across the galaxy from Terra and the scale of Imperial conquered space became relatively manageable, such resistance to change was understandable, yet short-sighted. As time passed and the demands of a constantly changing battlefield required greater and greater ingenuity on the part of the Imperial war machine, Imperial Army soldiers would often go into battle equipped with a multitude of different weapons, ammunition stocks, armor, and training. Rumors persist that there were darker reasons for it being desirable that no Imperial force could look to its own supply in these times, but evidence of such motivations cannot be substantiated. The very success of the earliest expeditionary fleets was to sound the death knell for such objections. For soon the Imperium had become so large that such resistance to more centralized logistics and bureaucracy became untenable. Central control of the Imperial forces, primarily the Imperial Army, was given to the newly named Departamento Munitorum shortly before the start of the Horus Heresy.
That sucks. It's like, congratulations, you're a new unit. And then the Horus Heresy takes over. Oh, that was
We didn't have
short-lived.
time to do anything.
Sorry. Go ahead.
From this point onwards, every Imperial Army regiment, and after the Horus Heresy, every Astra Militarum regiment, would look to the administrators of the Departamento Munitorum to raise, supply, and train and dispatch it. In recognition of the great importance of this work, no less than 3 seats amongst the lords of the Council of Terra were given to the most senior officers of the Departamento Munitorum: the Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Army, the Lord Commander of the State Imperium, and the Master of the Administratum. But getting back to the Commissariat, also known as the Officio Perfectus,
Of course.
is a subdivision of the Departamento Munitorum, whose task is to ensure the recruitment, training, and deployment of the core of the Astra Militarum political officers tasked with keeping the troops of the Imperial Guard on mission and under intense discipline, even in the face of some of the most terrifying threats of the galaxy. We want you. No. The Imperial Guard is exposed on a regular basis to terrible threats which can shake the resolve of even the most steel-hearted veteran, from bizarre aliens to the terrifying inhabitants of the Wall. To encourage the troops to fight the most horrendous of situations, political officers called commissars are attached to the regiments of the Imperial Guard. The role of the commissar is to fight alongside the regiment's regular officers and take control when morale is flagging, or the men are not fighting with sufficient zeal. In such situations, the commissar can take over command from a regular officer and summarily execute any man who tries to flee. Even the colonel of a regiment must be sure to display courage and the proper zeal at all times when a commissar is watching him or her. You see, by the fact that they aren't part of the militarum hierarchy, and a political officer allows them to punish those who fail their duty no matter what rank they hold, because they are outside the ranks of the Astra Militarum.
True, but commissars really don't order people around in the usual sense, like an officer, right? They simply are there to keep the men in line.
Normally, yes, although there are rare occurrences where a commissar might hold an actual rank in the Imperial Guard, although these circumstances are rare. If this is the case, then they do both jobs, provided one doesn't get in the way of the other.
Okay,
More
so
likely scenario of a commissar taking charge of a group of guardsmen is if whatever ranking officer is not performing their task or fleeing in the face of the enemy, which, in other words, not doing their job, then most likely they're shot or censured by the commissar. The commissar will take over command until another officer is supplied by the regiment. Now, that's about all I have to say on the commissariat, because in a couple of weeks we will be actually going in depth on the matter. But before we get onto how recruitment takes place, what do you think of the organization as a whole, brother?
well, real quick, anyways, the only commissar I can think of that actually held a military rank was Ibram Gaunt, right?
Right.
Can you think of anybody else?
No?
I'm sure there's been a couple others, because if I recall right, reading the books from Scribe Dan Abnett, they said it was rare, but it wasn't like this is the first time this has ever happened.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's happened before, and I'm sure there are other commissars that has taken place with, but all the commissars I can think of, which aren't a whole lot, but
Yeah.
I mean, like Cyphus Kane, he was just a commissar. I thought maybe Yarick did at one point, anyways. Did he at one point did he hold a military rank?
I don't think so. I think he was just basically left in charge.
So it was kind of like, there's nobody else left. Fine, I'll do it. What's your rank? My rank is I will put a boot up your ass if you don't do what I tell you. Okay, fair enough.
Because he is the hero of Armageddon, so it's
Right.
basically, we follow him. We'll
Right.
do what he says.
Quite frankly, so the Munitorum, I think it's a lot of really bad flack on the concept that, quite frankly, I mean, let's face it, their job is literally impossible. Not figuratively,
Right.
literally impossible. Just simply because of all the bureaucratic paperwork and all the rest of the bogus crap that goes on with that. So the fact that they function at all, in my opinion anyways, is a win for them.
Yeah.
I can understand why the Guard would be very frustrated with the Minotaurum, but at the same time, I mean, they do actually function fairly well for how poorly it's designed, I guess. That's probably the best way of describing it. Now, as to the rank and file, the other thing that I find interesting is that that whole concept that a lieutenant can tell a colonel to do something if he's in the general staff. Now, mind you, anyways, it's not the lieutenant actually telling him to do something. He is just forwarding information. When you get a lieutenant in the general staff that starts actually telling colonels what to do, and it's not because the general told him to do that, that lieutenant normally ends up in a heap of trouble. I just kind of wanted to clarify that. Yes, the lieutenant can tell a colonel what to do, but it's not really the lieutenant telling somebody to do something. He is just forwarding information from the general.
Unless the general says, Lieutenant, I want you to handle these people.
Right.
That would be very unfortunate for the colonel, because then, yes, he would be taking orders from the lieutenant.
Of course, at the same time, anyways, well, first off, those lieutenant. Okay, so I'm thinking, anyways, these lieutenants, most of them, anyways, like I said, they're pencil pushers. That's what they do. They liaison. That's their job. So I don't see a general actually telling a lieutenant, you need to take charge of this command here. Make sure it gets done right. But if he does, then he knows at least this lieutenant, at least two things are got to be going through his mind. One is that he trusts this guy. And secondly, anyways, he trusts them to actually get the job done.
Right.
So if that is the case, anyways, it would also be stated very clearly, anyways, lieutenant be like, look, general told me, anyways, I'm supposed to take over, anyways, for this brief period of time. Okay. Okay. It wouldn't be just randomly, anyways, he's like, hey, postman up at that station or whatever, kind of thing. If you start giving orders when the general hasn't told you to give orders, like I said before, normally you end up getting shot. If anybody finds out, especially the colonel. If the colonel finds out, he's probably the one that's going to shoot you.
Yeah.
I just think, anyways, that it's fairly interesting, that general staff and how that is all. It's not as, because when we think of like the chain of command, like in Terran 42, especially when you're looking at different military organizations, there's a reason why it is incredibly regimented. It's because you don't want people, anyways, going, well, who's in charge when people are shooting at them?
Yeah.
Because people higher up will actually sit there and try to figure this out, anyways, as shells are zipping past their heads. So the fact, anyways, it doesn't seem like this is nearly as cohesive with the Imperial Army is kind of strange to me.
The thing that's, okay, in my mind, is the most confused is if you have a whole bunch of different regiments working together and all of them have different ranking systems. That's what would be confusing to me.
Or okay, here's the other question I got for you, I guess. If they're invading a planet, right? And you've got different regiments from different planets, and they end up on the planet anyways, and they're working in cohesion with each other. Which colonel's in charge?
It would be the one that, if I remember correctly, it's the one with the longest
service record.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, that makes sense. I have heard actually on Terran 42, it sometimes, anyways, it's just which person's older. It's like, well, I was born 6 months older than you, so I'm in charge. Dang it. Okay, fine.
Well,
that
would be the same thing, because a lot of them
I'm your senior by 6 months. Well, it's fairly interesting, but you've probably been asking yourselves, you people that are listening, how people are recruited into the Imperial Guard? I'm sure you were wondering that too, Yuxin.
Yes, tell us.
Yeah, well, every Imperial commander in the Imperium, also known as a planetary lord or Imperial governor, those wonderful people, is responsible for the defense of their world. This is crucial, as the planet may need to defend itself against the predations of a myriad nefarious enemies for many solar months, or even standard years before reinforcements arrive. To this end, they are duty bound to recruit, equip, train, and maintain a fighting force. On some planets, this may take the form of an official military or garrison force, like a standard planetary defense force, or PDF for short. On other worlds, the duty to defend their world may fall to dozens of separate armies, tribes, and even hive gangs, some of which may even be warring factions who unite to oppose an invading foe. In any case, these forces are unlikely to ever leave the confines of their home world. Each of these forces is an individual body within the wider Astra Militarum, a separate militarum regimentum. They are free to defend their own world and enforce their own laws as long as these do not conflict with those of the Imperium, and so long as they pay their tithes.
As we learned in the Badab War, you can literally get away with murder. But if you fail to pay your taxes, you're dead.
Indeed. Yet, a part of the annual tithe that the imperial governors must fulfill is to send 1/10 of their overall fighting force, or more if the Departamento Militarum deems it necessary, to fight the Emperor's wars throughout the galaxy. The exact number of regiments that are to be raised for the Astra Militarum will depend upon the individual world's tithe grade and its proximity to hostile war zones. For a hive world such as Armageddon, caught in the throes of an all-consuming war, a draft of at least 100 million men at arms and several million armored vehicles is typical. A tiny fraction of the total populace, which numbers in the hundreds of billions. A far-flung agri-world may have a significantly lower military tribute, perhaps a few as 5 million men in cavalry, but this may be a significant proportion of that world's population. In any case, should a tithe be of an unacceptable quality, the imperial governor's life is forfeit. For this reason, those soldiers selected for the Astra Militarum tend to be drawn from the elite of the planet's troops.
Right, Badab War.
Methods of recruiting vary from world to world. On the death world of Catachan, every man, woman, and child is expected to serve in the regiments of the Catachan jungle fighters, and by extension, the Astra Militarum. On the seething hive worlds, such as Alcatraz, it is common for entire generations to be drafted and sent to fight on distant worlds. The indentured gangs given the choice between volunteering or summary execution. On many planets, service in the Imperial Guard it is seen as noble and brings much honor to the ruling houses. Many young hopefuls, especially on industrial worlds and factory planets, flock to the world's military forces in hope of being found worthy of the Imperial Guard. Often the only chance of escape from the claustrophobic existence and endless work shifts. It is not unusual for the elite warriors of a planet to compete for promotion to the Astra Militarum. On some of the more savage frontier worlds, these competitions can escalate into affairs that claim as many lives as a small war. Upon their initial founding, regiments are identified by the name of their homeworld and number. For example, the Cadian 144th is the 144th regiment to have been raised on the Lost Fortress world of Cadia. It is not uncommon, though, for a regiment's number to be recycled following its destruction, a new raising taking the designation of its predecessor. In this way, the regiment is refounded, the new recruits tasked with upholding its honor and traditions. Indeed, the Ventor 823rd serve the Emperor to this day, despite having been wiped out more than 10 times in the span of a single solar decade. In addition, regiments are often given unofficial names, either inherited or therefore part of tradition, or else earned on the field of battle. For example, the Catachan 7th Catachan Devils regiment take the name of the apex predator from the lethal jungles of their fetid death world, whereas the 8th Cadian, the Lord Castellan's own, honors the exploits of their former commanding officer, Lord Castellan Ursika E. Creed. The uniforms and specific armaments of the different militarum regiments change dramatically from world to world. Upon their raising, each regiment is equipped in the manner of their homeworld. Each newly inducted Imperial Guardsman issued with the same style of uniform and weapons as those of their fellow soldiers. Troops may go to war in full battle dress, or little more than primitive armor and tribal tattoos. The only universal piece of equipment common throughout the entirety of the Astra Militarum is the lasgun. Well, what do you think of the recruitment process, brother?
I find it interesting how many think about the fact that hiring an entire regiment of a gang, that's a huge gang.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, if we look at things at like percentages, like so let's take Terran 42, Chicago, back during the age of Prohibition. Al Capone, right? So the mafia.
Okay.
All right, so the mafia, anyways, in Chicago. How many people do you think were in the mafia in Chicago?
I don't know.
Maybe 5,000? Let's say 5,000.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. I mean, Chicago's a pretty big city. So, I mean,
Yes, but how many of those were part of the same gang?
they were all part of the mafia. So let's say 5,000. All right. Now we go to a hive world, anyways, that's got 800 billion people and use that percentage, anyways, of Chicago being about what, 100,000 people that live there. So then you take the percentage, and I'm not going to do the math, but it could be a substantial, large amount of people. That's all I'm saying. In an 800 billion populace, yes, you could have a gang that's fairly large. Now, the question of, would I want to fight alongside that gang? No.
No. Especially
Probably
if
not.
the next regiment over is another gang that happen to be in conflict with that gang.
Well, that's probably another reason why you've got them commissars. Make sure that none of that extracurricular activity takes place. But when I was writing this and going over this, I remember, anyways, the question last week with that Hermes sent out about the whole concept of purifying the warp, because these people are out there to fight in defense against the Imperium. I think a large majority of them really aren't there to fight for the Imperium, but they're there kind of concept. Right. Especially reading this, it's like a lot of them is just like, congratulations, you have been promoted to the Imperial Guard. Why? Well, there's this thing called tithes.
Or I just wanted to get out of here.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can see this. I mean, it's honestly, I think, exactly the same way, anyways, if you look at, like, for instance, Terran 42, the people that join the military. Now, there is a very small portion, anyways, that have joined, anyways, due to patriotism or exactly, anyways, a concept of service. I'm here to serve my country. And I think that's great. But I think a lot of people, too, anyways, it's just because you're like, well, I got out of high school and I need a job. Or I need to get out of this place. If I don't get out of this place, I'm going to be dead by the age of 21. Or
vocational things.
Yeah, like, you know, I joined, they help me anyways when I get out to go to college. I think there's a lot of reasons why people join the military, and I think there's a very small portion of them that join anyways due to service and patriotism.
Right.
And I think it's the same way anyways with the Imperial Guard. I think a lot of and the Imperial Guard also has got that other aspect of it. It's like, well, you don't have a choice. You are joining. Well, on some of these planets, which is not nearly as entertaining. I mean, the aspect of, let's face it, the aspect of free will in the Imperium is very, very small. But you got any other thought processes, anyways, on recruitment?
No, not really.
All right, so we got a little bit of time left, and we should probably go over how the Guard deals with the other fighting forces of the Imperium, like the Space Marines, the Sisters of Battle, the Mechanicum, the Inquisition, and of course, Euxin's favorite, the PDF.
Yes.
So, take it away, Euxin.
So, let's start with the Space Marines, since it's, the most obvious, I would assume.
Well, it's also at the top of your list here.
Yes. Overall, they do see them as demigods. So they, in general, the militarum, at least the lower ranking officers of the militarum, see them as being their superiors. It isn't until you get to the much higher ranks that they go, okay, yeah, you can't keep pushing your envelope. I mean, we'll respect your ideas, but we don't have to necessarily follow them.
Right. But I would also say, anyways, that if you're in the lower ranks, like a trooper, and you happen to come across a space marine, you're normally just dead. Because, as we know, anyways, the space marines only go to like the worst conditions ever.
Well, you aren't
And
necessarily dead. You may be being saved.
if you're lucky, yes. If you're lucky, you're being saved. But normally, anyways, if the battle hasn't started yet and you see a space marine, you should be just going, "Oh crap!"
No, I
What
was
are we doing
thinking
here?
if, for example, space marines show up while you're in battle.
Then you're like, "Sweet, we're saved." But like I said, if it's before a battle and you see a group of space marines walk past you, what you really should be thinking is, "Oh crap,
What sort of
we're all dead." Commissar, just go ahead, right in the back of the temple. It'll be faster.
in the
But
back
yeah,
of the temple?
what's that?
In the back of the temple?
In the back of the head, or the front's the temple. Yeah, sorry, my bad. Anyways, I think actually probably the best example that I've seen of this was for any of you on Terran 42 that have seen the trailer for Space Marine 2. There's a scene in the trailer after the Space Marines, they just kind of wreck a whole bunch of Tyranids. And they walk past Acadian Imperial Guardsman, and he just drops to his knees. He's just in awe. I mean, that's kind of normally what happens, anyways, when an Imperial Guardsman meets a Space Marine. Now, then again, at the same time, then you've got other people that do the exact opposite. Like that one story that we talked about, anyways. I believe it wasn't Larkin. It was crap. Who was it?
McCall.
McCall, yeah. Where he ends up in a war game with not one or two, but three Space Marines. And he ends up beating him, which is actually a very funny story. And if you want to check that out, anyways, you can listen to our, I believe it was our notable characters for White Scars, correct?
Or it was the one right after it.
Okay. Yeah. But just go ahead and listen to all of our White Scars, actually, because no one did, and they're actually pretty good. But like you mentioned before, anyways, most people in the Astra Militarum never even see a Space Marine. It's almost like you said, they're considered demigods. They're not talked about very often. They're just it's like rumored that there's these guys out there called Space Marines, his angels, the Emperor's angels. Right? It's just, and when they do meet them, it's just it would be like if you walked down the street and all of a sudden Eddie Murphy walked in front of you and said, "Hey, how's it going?" You know, it's just like, "Oh, you're Eddie Murphy," you know. But anyways, moving on. What about okay? What about the Sisters of Battle? What do you think of them? Okay, well, real quick, they gotta love the Astra Militarum's gotta love the Hospitalers, right?
Yeah.
Those are like the nurses or the
Yeah.
doctors. Yeah, I don't think that there's any one of them, anyways, that hates those Sisters of Battle. But what about the rest of them?
So I think it's sort of a mixed bag. Some of them are just like, yes, we have some very disciplined fighters. They'll be very, very helpful in this situation. Some of them go, oh no. We had
Why?
these zealots that are going to be charging straight into the middle and forcing us to follow them.
Okay, there's that second part. I was like, who cares if they're charging into into the enemy? And you're like, and then we're supposed to follow them. Like, there it is. there's the conundrum. I think that they're probably more often than not, anyways, happy to see them. Just
Yeah.
on the simple concept that they produce a significant amount of firepower and they're helpful. Now, I would also think, though, that the Sisters of Battle are also along the same lines as the Adeptus Astartes, though. They're not often seen. I mean, they're probably more often seen than the Astartes, but I think that they're also pretty rare, aren't they? In considerations.
Well, you do also have to take in consideration that the number of Sisters of Battle in comparison to Imperial Guard regiments is significantly smaller.
Right. No, that's what I'm saying. I mean, with the Imperial Guard, there are quadrillions upon quadrillions of people, anyways, fighting. As opposed to Sisters of Battle, you've got probably about maybe a billion, you know, which is a large force, but I mean, they're
Yeah.
spread out. I don't know. I think, anyways, that they're probably thought a lot the same lines, anyways, the Astra Militarum or the Adeptus Astartes for a lot of the ground troops, anyways, just on this concept of, I mean, these warrior women. First off, anyways,
Yeah.
that's, I mean, that are in power armor and they're all, they're angels. They're beautiful. They're, blonde haired beauties that come out of nowhere with giant guns that murder everything in front of you. I mean, that sounds pretty awesome. So I think, anyways, by the way, we got to kind of have to clarify this a little bit, because I think, anyways, the regular trooper has a different opinion of these groups than commanders.
Yeah.
So from now on, why don't we say, anyways, it's like, well, this is what the commanders think of these people, and this is what the regular Joe Blow trooper Bragg thinks of them. Right. So I think, anyways, that, like I said, anyways, the troopers would probably be in awe, anyways, of a Sister of Battle. Now, commanders, I think I kind of agree with you, anyways. Commanders might be like, oh crap, they're here, so they're just going to want to charge in the battle. This is going to ruin our tactics and our game plan. Maybe we can talk them out of it. Maybe we can,
but not very likely.
Show them some sort of strategy or something like that. But in the end, anyways, if they go charging in the battle and kind of demand you to charge in with them, you're kind of stuck doing that. So yeah, I can hear what you're saying. Well, okay, now the group that none of us like. Well, actually, there's a couple of them coming up here. The Mechanicum. What do you think the Mechanicum, the Astra Militarum, thinks of the Mechanicum?
I think when it comes to the average guardsman, they just don't really see them as much. For that matter, I think no matter what regimental level, I think they just see them as, okay, they are necessary for things to keep going.
I think for the lower troop, it's more along the lines of if their equipment is working.
Yeah.
If their equipment is working, somebody mentions the mechanic, is like, they did a great job with this one. But if it's not working at all, it's like those stupid guys from Mars. They can't get anything right. I'm sure, right. By the way, staff sergeants and the ones, anyways, that are trying to bring in supplies and whatnot probably don't have a very good opinion of the Mechanicum.
True.
And commanders, it's probably the same lines, I'm thinking. It's like, if the stuff is working, then great. And we're getting it anyways expediently, that's fantastic. But if it doesn't work, it's just like, well, who are we blaming? The manufacturer. I mean,
no, they'll be blaming the Munitorum.
Yeah, well, yeah, fair enough.
You aren't supplying the things that the...
Yeah. And the Munitorum, anyways, will be just like, God dang it, you gave us a bunch of stuff that doesn't work. And the Mechanicum will be like, well, apparently our sacrifices of the Messiah in the war spirit machine didn't work. It's not logical. God, I hate those guys. Anyways. And now everybody's personal favorite, the Inquisition. What do you think? What do you think the Imperial thinks? Oh, this is going to be a fun one. Go ahead.
Okay. Overall, this is my viewpoint, is that they see them with, in general, suspicion, weariness, and distrust.
Every single one of them.
Yep, pretty much.
Well, it doesn't help any. Well, first off, it doesn't help that the Inquisition, when they show up, if they do, they're normally there to take a bunch of regiments. And the Astra Militarum can't do anything about it. They're just like, we're here to take all these guys and we're going on a mission. Okay, well, what's the mission? We can't tell you. Okay. Am I going to get my guys back? No, you will never see these people again.
Or maybe.
No. They will never see them again. What happens at the end, anyways, of a campaign, if it goes well, the Inquisition goes great, and then they bombard the regiments to kill them all off so they don't spread rumors about what happened with the Inquisition. Or they just keep them until they all die off in the next campaign or the next one after that. It's been known, anyways, that an Inquisitor might have like one grizzled old veteran of the Imperial Guard next to him, and he's the only guy left from like 1,000,000 Imperial Guardsmen they went and grabbed. That's why he's there, and he's stuck there until he dies. Oh, I hate the Inquisition. They're maniacal sociopaths of doom. I can't believe we did boxes on. Anyways, the PDF. What does the guard think of the PDF?
They think of them as, ironically, meat shields. So the same way that most Space Marines see the Imperial Guard see the PDF. Meat shields.
We have officially found it, folks. The low man on the totem pole, a.k.a. the PDF.
The Planetary Defense Force.
Yes.
Yes.
Which, quite frankly, some of the PDF are actually, they're pretty viable. But 9 times out of 10, anyways, they have significantly less training than the Imperial Guard. And more importantly than that, anyways, the Imperial Guard is time and time again, anyways, in actual combat. As opposed to the PDF, which normally, anyways, their combat has to deal with, like, putting down a gang uprising or directing traffic. I mean, they're not really, they're like a police force for a planet. So, I mean, they're not Arbites. They're a little bit above Arbites, but some people think Arbites were actually better than the PDF. But it's just this, they are the low man on the totem pole.
Yeah.
So if you're stuck in the trenches with a PDF and you're a Astra Militarum guy, you're just sitting there going, great. I'm just toast because this guy doesn't know which end of the las gun to hold.
Or you're going, okay, you jump out first.
Yeah. Now, mind you, anyways, there have been times, like, for instance, you mentioned the Badab War. Luft Horon actually ended up training his PDF forces to be, like, actually really, really good. They were like crack troops by the time he was done with them. So, I mean, it does take place occasionally where the Imperial Guard shows up to, like, help a planet, and they're like, holy crap, the PDF is actually working?
Another example is when Caiaphas Cain came to Perlia, I believe, the first time, where it crashed landing.
Is that the one where the desert world with the orcs?
Yeah, he came across the PDF, and they were pretty good. But part of the reason for that was because of the fact that they had been fighting the orcs by themselves behind enemy lines for a while.
Yeah, they'd been tempered in the crucible of battle.
Yes.
But, yeah, like you said, anyways, there are some PDFs that are actually very good at their job. But in comparison to the Imperial Guard, it's rare. And on that sad note, we are out of time for today. Now, I understand we went a little bit long because we are talking about the Imperial Guard, and they are really that important. But join us next week as we discuss the vast armament of the Imperial Guard.
Fantastic. Look forward to talking about the mighty Lehman Russ.
Tank, right?
Tank.
Yes.
Thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this Vox. Feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and comment. And don't forget to check out the shop. We got some cool stuff there, like clothes, pillows, and hats.
And if you really enjoyed the program, feel free to join our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashraka. Have a great day. And as always, until next time, this is Ekthar.
And Yuxin.
Signing off.